They walk past you like the past never screamed, like the nights you couldn't sleep never happened, like the promises, the betrayals, the storms. They all just vanished into thin air, and you stand there, haunted by a memory that only you seem to carry. They laugh, they move on, they wear normal like a costume, but inside you know something is broken. You didn't imagine it, you didn't exaggerate it. They just learned how to act, because facing the truth would require a courage they never had. So instead, they pretend, they perform, they rewrite, and in that silence, in that denial, they hope you'll doubt your own story. But this voice, your voice, was never meant to stay quiet, and today we speak. Silence is their shield. They don't speak because they can't. Not because they've lost the words, but because speaking would mean breaking open the vault they've sealed so tightly shut. The vault where your pain is locked. The vault where their guilt lives breathing heavily beneath the surface. They act like nothing happened because silence is safer than honesty. It's their shield. It protects the image they've spent years crafting. You see, if they were to acknowledge what they did, the betrayal, the emotional abandonment, the lies, they'd have to confront the reflection in the mirror, and that reflection is terrifying. So they stay quiet. They smile. They go on with their lives as though they were never part of your unraveling. But make no mistake, silence is not absence of memory. It's the presence of fear. They remember. They know. They just won't say it. Because to say it is to claim it, and to claim it is to feel the shame they've buried. So they pretend. They walk through the same rooms, brush past the same people, maybe even look you in the eye. Hold calm, composed, as though the fire never touched you both. But you burned. You still feel the heat when no one's watching. And you wonder, how can someone walk away from the wreckage they caused without ever looking back? The answer is, silence is how they survive their own decisions. It's how they avoid the avalanche of regret. They're not strong enough to say, I hurt you. They're not brave enough to admit, I failed you. Instead, they disappear into the noise of everyday life, hoping it drowns out your truth. Because your voice, if heard, would break their illusion. It would demand accountability, and they're not built for that. So silence becomes their strategy, their way of erasing the evidence without lifting a finger. And yet, in that silence, you see everything. You see the cracks in their smile, the stiffness in their laughter, the way they avoid certain conversations, because silence doesn't mean peace. Sometimes it's the loudest confession. And one day, when they're alone with their thoughts, when no audience is left to perform for, that silence will speak. It will echo in the quiet corners of their conscience, and it won't sound like nothing happened. It will sound like everything they never dared to admit. So don't be fooled by their calm. Don't envy their stillness. Behind that silence is a war they hope no one ever sees, but you've seen it, you survived it. And that alone means they can never truly silence you. The rewrite of reality, they don't forget what happened. They just reshape it. They twist it, color it, dilute it until it barely resembles the truth. Because reality, in its raw form, is too inconvenient for them. The truth makes them the villain, the betrayer, the one who walked away when you needed them most. But if they rewrite it, if they tell it differently, even to themselves, they become the misunderstood one, the overburdened soul, the innocent party who did what they had to do. And slowly they convince themselves. They strip your emotions from the story and replace them with excuses. They take your heartbreak and rebrand it as drama. They take your loyalty and twist it into obsession. In their version of events, you were always too sensitive, too intense, too difficult to love. Because that version lets them sleep at night. That version keeps their self-image intact. The rewriting doesn't just happen with words, it's in their behavior. They laugh freely, post photos, move on with ease. Not because they've healed, but because they've deleted the parts that don't fit their narrative. And the more they tell the story their way, the more they believe it. Even if deep down In the quietest part of them, they know the real version. The one where you gave your all, where they walked away without looking back, where you were left holding pieces of a bond they destroyed. But they won't speak of that. They'll look you in the eye with confidence, because their rewritten reality has become their script. And if you dare to speak the truth, they'll flinch, not out of guilt, but out of fear that someone might believe you instead of them. Because your truth is dangerous. It shatters the illusion. It brings light to the cracks they've spent so long painting over. And so they discredit it. They mock it. They call it exaggeration or misunderstanding. But deep down, they know the truth you hold is not just real, it's undeniable. And that terrifies them. Because if people saw what you saw, if they heard the full story, their carefully built persona would collapse. And so they continue the performance. They act normal. They act like nothing ever happened, not because it didn't, but because they've worked hard to bury the version where they were wrong. So remember this. You don't need their validation to own your truth. Their rewritten reality doesn't cancel out the pain they caused. Just because they act like it was nothing doesn't mean it was. You lived it. You felt it. You were there for the nights they pretend never existed. And one day, when the truth grows louder than their fiction, their silence, their performance, and their pretty little version of the past will all come crashing down. Because no matter how many times they rewrite the story, the truth remembers. Confrontation is too costly. They avoid you, not because they don't know what they've done, but because they know exactly what it would cost them to face you. Confrontation demands something they're unwilling to give: accountability, honesty, and a soul stripped of defense. That's too heavy for them, so they hide behind indifference. They act like nothing happened, because to look you in the eyes would tear open the very thing they're desperate to keep sealed. You are a reminder of what they did, of who they became in your story, of how far they fell from the image they wanted to uphold. To confront that would be to drop the mask, and without that mask, they are exposed, vulnerable, and unguarded. So they choose distance, they choose silence, they choose distraction, and all the while they hope you'll interpret their behavior as healing, as moving on, as strength. But what they're doing isn't healing, it's hiding. They walk away from the wreckage pretending it never existed, not because they're untouched, but because they fear that admitting the damage will make it real. And real things must be answered for. You see, confrontation would mean standing still long enough to listen, not to respond, but to truly hear the pain they caused. It would mean saying words they've never practiced. I was wrong. You didn't deserve that. I failed you. But those words don't come easy to people who've built their self-worth on denial. So instead, they hope time will erase what they don't have the courage to face. They rely on your exhaustion, on your silence, on the possibility that you'll eventually move on without ever demanding what they owe you, the truth. They'd rather let relationships rot in unresolved silence than sit down and acknowledge what they broke. Because in their world, confrontation isn't healing, it's humiliation. They don't want to feel small. They don't want to be the one who caused pain. They want to walk freely, untethered by guilt. So they rewrite the story, avoid the conversation, and bury the truth under distractions. But that doesn't mean they're free, because while you were brave enough to face your pain, they were busy running from theirs. And no matter how fast they move, it follows, in quiet moments, in sudden memories, in the eyes of someone new who sees through them just like you once did. So let them avoid it. Let them pretend, because in the end it's not you who couldn't face the truth. It's them. You were strong enough to stay, to fight, to speak. They were not, and that silence they cling to, one day it will echo back at them louder than any confrontation ever could. Because avoiding the truth doesn't make it disappear, it only makes it wait. And truth never stays buried forever. Guilt wears a mask. They smile now. They laugh like everything's fine. They show up in rooms full of light and talk like nothing ever shattered in the dark. But you know better. Because guilt doesn't always cry. It doesn't always confess. Sometimes it hides behind the most polished performance. They wear normal like it's armor. They look calm, collected, present. But it's a costume stitched together by denial. They don't talk about what they did, not because they've forgotten, but because if they did, the mask would slip, and beneath that mask lies something heavy, something fragile, guilt. It doesn't scream like anger. It doesn't plead like regret. It pretends, it plays a role, and the role is always the same. I'm fine, you're overreacting. Let's just move on. But deep down they know. Every time they see your face, they remember the look in your eyes when you were left standing with broken pieces. Every time they hear your name, something tugs inside. A reminder that the story isn't as clean as they tell it. So they double down on the performance. They post, they laugh, they live. Louder, brighter, as if trying to drown out the sound of their own conscience. Because guilt doesn't always show up in tears. Sometimes it shows up in overcompensation, in forced joy, in silence. They avoid your presence not because you matter so little, but because you matter too much. You are the mirror, the unfiltered reflection, the reminder of the choice they made and the heart they broke. And that reminder, it burns, so they avoid it. They pretend. They put on the smile and hope no one notices the cracks beneath it. But you do, because you've seen both sides. You've seen the version of them that whispered promises, and you've seen the one that vanished when you needed truth. That mask they wear, it's not strength. It's fear, dressed in confidence, because facing guilt requires more than a smile. It requires a soul strong enough to say, I was wrong. And they're not there yet. Maybe they never will be. So they keep wearing the mask, thinking it hides them. But masks slip, especially in silence, especially when they're alone, and in those quiet moments when there's no one left to impress. Guilt creeps in. It whispers louder than the applause, stronger than the fake smiles. And the weight of what they've done doesn't go away. It waits, it lingers, it haunts. So don't be fooled by the mask. Don't envy the performance. You faced the truth. You lived the pain. You rose from it. But they're still hiding, still acting, still wearing guilt like it's invisible. But guilt is never invisible, not to the soul who carries it. And one day, when the curtain falls and the mask can no longer hold, they'll see what you always knew. Your memory threatens their image. They act like nothing happened, not because they believe they were innocent, but because your memory is dangerous. It holds a version of them they've worked hard to bury. The version where they were careless, selfish, maybe even cruel. And if that version were ever revealed, the image they've built, the one they parade in front of others, would crack. That's why they avoid you. That's why they silence you without ever saying a word. Not because you lie, but because you remember the truth too vividly. Your presence alone threatens their illusion. The stories they tell about themselves, the mask of decency they wear, the praise they seek from others, it all teeters on one fragile lie, that they did nothing wrong, but you were there. You remember the moments when their silence cut deeper than words. You remember how you gave and gave, while they took without ever turning back. And no matter how much they try to act like the past never happened, your memory still lives, and it scares them. Because if you speak, if you stand in your truth, others might see the cracks in their perfect mask. So they downplay your pain, they call it drama, they call you too emotional, not because it's true, but because it's easier to dismiss your truth than to admit theirs. In their world, their image is everything. How they're seen matters more than who they really are. They want to be admired, respected, adored, and your truth is the one thing that can undo all of that. So they keep their distance. They stay silent. They move on with forced peace and pretend the storm was never real, because acknowledging the past would mean losing control of the narrative, and that loss would expose the truth they've hidden from everyone, even themselves. But here's the irony: the more they try to silence your memory, the louder it grows, because truth has weight, and it doesn't fade just because they ignore it. Your story, Your memory is not a threat. It's a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. They reflect, and what they see in you is what they're trying to escape in themselves. But no matter how far they run, they can't outrun what they did. They can only delay the moment they have to face it. So let them perform, let them pretend. Their image may fool others, but your memory, it holds the truth. And truth doesn't need validation to be real. It just needs courage to be spoken. And one day, when the lights dim and the applause fades, they'll come face to face with the reality they tried to erase. And in that moment, they'll realize you weren't the threat, you were the proof.